Hi, Aurora. My name is Diana Denwood. I'm a water conservation specialist with Aurora Water, and today we're going to be talking about waterwise and native grasses for fabulous landscaping in Aurora. This is Little Lawn on the Prairie. So our natural ecosystem here in Aurora is shortgrass prairie, aka steppe or high plains. We are semi-arid, receiving only on average 15 inches of precipitation every year. Pre-colonization and development, the shortgrass prairie was home to many grazing animals, including the big ones, bison, pronghorn, prairie dogs, deer, and elk. Short grasses like buffalo grass, blue grama, western wheatgrass, they dominate this ecosystem and they have evolved over time to thrive in our conditions. They're tolerant of drought, they're tolerant of heavy or moderate grazing. These grasses predominantly top out at 2 feet tall, which, yes, that is considered short, and they thrive on little water. One of the reasons why they can do that and remain so drought tolerant but still so healthy is their extensive root system. They are very deep. Look at how deep the roots are compared to that second grass on the screen, which is Kentucky bluegrass, where the roots are very, very shallow, especially in comparison to the feet long root systems of our native grasses. Now, most people don't want a true native prairie, but we can achieve a tidier, balanced, and decorative look with native grasses and potentially other water-wise plants. Or you can go with a full native grass lawn. It is beautiful. This option is HOA friendly too. This is a buffalo grass lawn. It provides that same consistent short carpet look. It looks a little bit different, but it saves a ton of water. After it's established, buffalo grass, shown here, needs watering only once per week. Establishment can take a couple full years for that root system to develop and get long, which is what we want it to do. Now, let's quickly define native versus water-wise grass. A native grass is a plant that is native to our region. So think eastern Colorado, Wyoming, other states as well. It uses at least 50% less water than our common turf grasses like Kentucky bluegrass. It is a warm season species. Buffalo grass is a warm season species, but there are cool season species that are native as well. So one example, like I mentioned, is buffalo grass. Another one is blue grama. Water-wise grasses, on the other hand, are not native to North America. They are introduced species from other parts of the world. They also use up to 50% less water than Kentucky bluegrass. Usually the ones that we know of and recommend are warm season species. One example is dogtuff, which is relatively new to the landscaping industry in the last several years. There are so many benefits of native grasses, not just reduced water use and lower water bills, but converting to native grass is usually a lower cost option than doing a traditional water-wise landscaping that has ornamental grasses, shrubs, trees, perennials, mulches, and a drip system. Native grasses are also obviously gorgeous. They also don't need to necessarily be mown. You don't need to mow them. They also, generally speaking, don't need fertilizer because they are adapted to our leaner soils here in Aurora, and you don't need to aerate them. They don't form a thatch like Kentucky bluegrass and some other grasses do. They are also resistant to our high heat, actually our wild extremes, going from cool to hot weather in a few days. They're also resistant to drought, and because they're native, they're providing habitat for our native wildlife. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. There are some drawbacks to native grass when used in a lawn situation or a yard. And there's also some differences that you need to be aware of if you're going to go with a native grass and you're used to a regular cool season turf grass. So the drawbacks are that the native grasses are not sturdy for foot traffic. If you continually walk the same path along your along your buffalo grass lawn, you're going to actually wear a path through it. So they can't handle a lot of foot traffic. The seeds are more expensive than a traditional turf grass seed. They are not available as sod, so that means they're going to be slower to establish. You can't roll out a carpet of buffalo grass and have it look established in one day. They also require higher weed maintenance, and they have lower tolerance to herbicide. Now, the differences, on the other hand, that are not necessarily drawbacks, they're just different, is that native grasses like buffalo grass, blue grama, and western wheatgrass, which is the ones we'll be talking about today, they're not going to form as thick of a mat as a Kentucky bluegrass does. So they're not as dense. But the benefit to that is they don't form thatch. They are a different color. They are going to be light green to medium green, not that deep emerald green of a lot of turf grasses. And they also have a longer winter dormancy. The warm season grasses, they are happiest green and thriving between about May and August, and then they're going to be looking a little bit yellower on the shoulder seasons. That doesn't mean that they're unhappy. That is their natural life cycle. Now, for non-native water-wise grasses, the drawbacks are that they are more expensive than traditional seed or sod. Some of them are available as plugs or in sod squares. And they still require, however, especially if you are growing from plugs, you still have to do more weed maintenance on them. And they also, like the natives, have a lower herbicide tolerance. The difference is, again, not necessarily drawbacks, is that they're mostly a medium green color, not deep emerald green. The great thing is that they are resilient to foot traffic. And like the natives, the warm season water-wise grasses have a longer winter dormancy period. So you want to ask yourself, is native grass right for me? Native grass is great for someone who enjoys the look of a lawn, so you can mow them, or buffalo grass just stays short, or a prairie look, where you're going to leave those grasses a little bit longer for them to reach their natural height. If you are well aware of weeds and you can identify them, or you're willing to learn, native grass is a good option for you. If you can weed weekly for the first 1 or 2 seasons, or pay to have someone weed. If you dislike mowing, it's great for you. If you have a yard that is full sun at minimum 6 hours per day, native grasses will not work in deep shade. And for the folks who want a lower cost conversion option, native grass is going to be great for you too. It's not going to be great for people who don't enjoy the look of a prairie, or would be willing to mow if they choose a taller native grass. If you dislike weeding, or if you have limited mobility concerns and you're unable to weed regularly, or of course pay someone to do that. If you want instant finished results, native grass is not for you. And unfortunately, if you have a shady yard, the native grasses are not going to thrive in your full shade yard. So let's now go through several native grasses that we recommend for yards in Aurora. The first one is blue grama, or Butaloa gracilis. It's a warm season grass. There are a couple different cultivars that are pretty common that do very well. It's available as seed or plug. It is a taller grass when allowed to fully grow to its mature height, reaching usually about 18 inches, but sometimes some can get really tall at 24 inches. Just random different individual plants can get that tall. But for the most part, they're topping out at about 18 inches. It does not like foot traffic. Technically, it is a bunch grass, but when planted densely, it will form the look of turf, as you can see here in this photo taken at Aurora Waterwise Garden. It's moderately dense. It will not need aeration ever. I recommend that if you like the look of the tall grasses and you like seeing those pretty seed heads that formed when the grass reaches its mature height, don't mow it. Only mow it once a year in very late autumn or early winter before the first heavy snow, ideally, so that you can remove some of that the blades that have died back, remove some of that bulk, so it's not covering the grasses the following growing season. And unfortunately, this is like the other natives, it has no shade tolerance. The next grass is buffalo grass, Butylaua dactyloides. It is also a warm season grass. There are a number of cultivars that do very well. It is available as seed or as plugs, and it's a shorty. It tops out at 4 to 8 inches, again, depending on the cultivar, and sometimes those individual plants can maybe get a little bit taller than its neighbors. It also has minimal foot traffic tolerance. It is a turf-forming grass, so it will grow thickly together and it does get dense. Again, this one does not need to be mown. If you're okay with the grasses getting above 4 inches tall, no need to mow it. And that's a nice benefit because you don't necessarily have to change out your irrigation heads. You can keep the ones that you use for your regular turf grass lawn, and that saves you time and money. And so you can mow it once again in late autumn to remove some of the dead blades, some of that bulk, so it's not covering the grass when it grows in the next season. It does have low shade tolerance and, low herbicide tolerance and no shade tolerance. The third native grass I want to cover is western wheatgrass. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the genus for you. It's a cool season grass, which is different from the other natives that I mentioned. There are no known cultivars. You will just be purchasing western wheatgrass. It is available at this time only as seed. This is a taller one. It can get 18 to 30 inches tall, but it can be mown. If you want a shorter turf look, you can mow it regularly, especially if it's in your front yard or along a sidewalk. But if it's in an area where you want to see that taller length of the grass and you like to see that movement in your yard, leave it unmown. You could also mow part of it and then leave the rest of it unmown. You can do a lot of different things with this grass. The other cool thing about this grass is that it has high herbicide tolerance, but unfortunately, like the others, it has minimal shade tolerance. It does form a medium density area, and again, because it's native, it has a high habitat benefit, just like the other native grasses. Now let's move along to the non-native water-wise grasses. The first one I'm going to cover is dogtuff. That's the commercial name. It is a cultivar of a African dogtooth grass, but it is cold tolerating. And the scientific name, the genus is Cynodon. It is a warm season grass. The cultivar, it's not a cultivar, it is a trademarked species called dogtuff. It's available in plugs. And it is also a shorty. It only gets about 4 to 6, maybe 7 inches tall. And it gets kind of a natural bumpy look if it's left unmown. You can see that kind of bumpy look in the photo to the right, but you can also mow it so it's a uniform height. Because it's not native, it has a lower habitat benefit. We don't have pollinators or other insects that are adapted to it. So it's more like your Kentucky bluegrass. It does get high density. Again, you don't have to mow it unless you want that perfectly uniform look. The herbicide tolerance on this one is moderate, which is helpful. So after the generally first year of establishment, you can use herbicide on it from time to time if you need to. But this one, like some of the natives, has no shade tolerance. The last grass I wanted to talk about is Tahoma 31. It's also a Cynodon genus. It's a warm season grass. It is relatively new to the industry as well, just like dogtuff. There aren't any specific cultivars. It is something that was developed at Oklahoma State, and so there are no cultivars. You can source it as a sod. It comes in sod squares, so it's not something you would roll out like Kentucky bluegrass rolls. You will have to lay the squares next to each other. And it is also quite short. It tops out at 5 inches. It has high traffic tolerance, which is a wonderful benefit. It is high density. You do not have to mow it, certainly at 3 to 5 inches. Another benefit is that it is like dogtuff, has moderate tolerance for herbicide, and unlike the others, it also has moderate shade tolerance. So you can plant it under a tree, not in deep shade, not like under a conifer tree, but you can plant it under a deciduous tree and it will do well. Now, when you're buying these grasses, some of them come in mixes. You may be interested in a mix of several different kinds of grasses together, and that can be a wonderful way to do your lawn. But look on the fine print and make sure that you're avoiding the following grasses. Make sure you're avoiding crested wheatgrass. It's a non-native grass. It was used a lot in the past, but it's very invasive, and it forms this pedestal form where the soil around it will kind of erode away with our natural precipitation, and it's left on taller stands, and it seems to not have too much that likes to grow around it. That's in lower density plantings, but avoid that because it's non-native and it is invasive. Another one that is non-native and invasive is smooth brome. That was also a preferred grass to be used in mixes in the past decades because it spreads so quickly, but that's the problem now. It spreads so quickly via seed and also by rhizome, and so it will take over. So make sure that's not in your mix. And then also fine fescues. Avoid fine fescues. They're not native. They use a little bit less water than Kentucky bluegrass, but not that much. So it's not a great water saving choice. Maybe it'll work okay and use less water in shaded areas, but not in full sun areas. And it's not available for our grass replacement incentive rebate. So make sure you're checking those labels on mixes. Now I've got some before and after photos to share with you to whet your appetite for doing a native or water-wise grass project at your own home. So on the left here, this is a backyard. There was Kentucky bluegrass mixed with some other grasses. Sometimes it's hard to tell. And then after, this resident used Tahoma 31, and you can see how short it remains, and beautiful and uniform and that nice medium green. Here's another example. Again, this was a front yard, Kentucky bluegrass, maybe some other grasses mixed in there. You can tell by some of the yellow spots, although those could be dog spots as well. Afterward, they did a really interesting project where they mixed traditional water-wise landscaping and dogtuff. And this is within the first season of planting. So you can see where the individual plugs started spreading out, but where the height of those bumps, that's the original dogtuff plug. So those will mix together more and become a little bit more even, but there'll still be some bumpiness if this resident decides to leave the grass unmown. This is at a City of Aurora park. Before, it was a huge expanse of Kentucky bluegrass. They decided to do some water saving in some of the non-functional turf areas where people just weren't having activities, they weren't playing on those areas, and so they did a prairie mix with western wheatgrass, and here's what it looks like in the summer and also in the fall. And then I don't have a before photo for this, but this is an after photo of a dogtuff installation, and we know that this is a mown area because we're not seeing those bumps, we're seeing a uniform height. So this is what it looks like when dogtuff is mown. Now let's get into the actual conversion process. So the first thing to do is make sure that you have a design and your timeline figured out, depending on the method that you want to use for grass removal. So you'll want to figure out which grass you're going to use. And of course, design according to sun exposure, understanding that the native grasses, they want full sun, and the water-wise grasses will tolerate, or at least Tahoma 31 will tolerate some shade. You want to be careful or even avoid conversion under trees where possible, again, especially for those natives. And also, you just want to be careful around existing tree roots because they don't like to be disturbed. And you want to design with your irrigation system in mind. So you need to convert a full irrigation zone because, again, these grasses don't need nearly as much water as Kentucky bluegrass does. So if you have Kentucky bluegrass and native grass on a zone, one's going to be overwatered and one's going to be underwatered, or vice versa. Also remember, if you're going with a tall grass like blue grama and don't want to mow it, you will need to change out your existing irrigation heads to 12-inch heads so the water is not blocked by that tall grass and it gets to where it needs to go. Now for your timeline, if you're going to use a sod cutter to remove your turf, that can take maximum 2 days. If you have a really large area, maybe it would take longer. But generally speaking, you can cut out your existing grass in 1 day. If you go with herbicide, that can take up to 2 applications of that herbicide and up to 4 weeks. You may need to, again, depending on your method, aerate and rake, so that could take a day. And then if you're sowing seed or planting plugs, that affects your timeline. So for warm season grasses, you want to install the new seed or plugs between May 15th and June 30th. That's the ideal time for doing seed or plugs with native grasses. Warm season grasses. If you're doing cool season grasses, the shoulder seasons are better. April 1st through June 15th, or August 1st through September 15th works well too. So let's talk about the methods of removing that grass. You can use a sod cutter. Yes, there are manual sod cutters. That's the one on the left. Or the more common and much easier on your body way to do it is with a mechanical sod cutter, a gas-powered sod cutter. And then if you are going to use herbicide, what you'll need to do is apply the herbicide, wait 2 weeks, make sure all your grass is dead. If it is not, you will need to reapply, spray, wait another 2 weeks, and then hopefully all the grass will be dead. If you do have some patches, make sure that you remove them with a shovel. Patches that are still living, I mean, remove those with a shovel, because in your new landscape, Kentucky bluegrass, if it survives, and it will in the first few weeks during establishment, it will be the weed. So you'll want to remove that. You can do so with a shovel. And then you will need to mow that grass short and aerate, and I'll cover that a little bit more later on. The next thing you want to do is consider your existing irrigation system. So like I mentioned, if you have short grasses or if you choose short grasses, you're not going to need to modify your system. Your 4-inch heads are going to be just fine for the buffalo grass and the dogtuff and the Tahoma. But if you choose taller grasses and want them to grow to their full height, you will want to install a taller sprinkler head, like a 12-inch head. So that would be for your blue grama or your western wheatgrass. 12 is as tall as they get. So that's what you would choose, even though the western wheatgrass does get taller. This is also a really great time to fix any inefficiencies you have, or poor distribution uniformity in your system, so you can add or eliminate heads at this time. Don't want to forget, if you have trees in your area, you want them to maintain their their health, and so you do need to make sure to continue to water them, even as you taper down the watering for your new native or water-wise grass. So here's a handy chart on how much you do need to water depending on your tree size. Step 4 is using compost for your native grasses. If you choose, a non-native grasses. If you choose water-wise non-native grasses, you will want to rototill in compost to feed those grasses to make sure they're set up to be as healthy as they can be. So you would evenly spread 4 cubic yards of compost per 1,000 square feet. and then you would rototill that in or use a shovel to till that in. Again, be careful around existing trees. You do not want to cut more than 10% of the roots of a tree, because that is very detrimental to that plant and could lead to its deterioration over time. So avoid disturbing, cutting those tree roots in the critical root zone, which is along the drip line of the tree. So the farthest out branches, that's the drip line. Straight down from there, the circle that creates around your tree, that's the critical root zone where you want to avoid disturbing those tree roots in particular. Don't forget edger. If you are edging between a existing garden bed and your grass area, then you will want to put edger down to maintain a tidy look and to stop the roots from spreading like a buffalo grass. You want to discourage the grass from spreading into your garden bed. And you want to make sure that you install the edging at the correct height. It should be no more than a ½ inch above the soil level. Now, here's step 5. If you are going with seed, these are the instructions that you would follow. If you're using plugs, you can skip this step. So if you're starting with bare soil, because you have cut your old turf out, you'll want to smooth that surface with the flat side of a hard rake. Then flip that rake over and use the tines to create small furrows. Do your best to not step much in the areas that you've just furrowed, because those are going to help the seeds stay in place. For large areas, if you have multiple 1,000 square feet that you're doing, consider hiring a company to drill seed for you. If you're starting with dead turf, again, make sure it's entirely dead. You want to mow it as short as you can get it, maybe even use a string trimmer to really get it to the base. Then you will aerate, and then you will sow the seed. Well, we'll talk about sowing in a second. But the aeration will create holes where your seed has good direct contact with the soil, which is what you want for it to germinate. The application rate for sowing seed is about 2 to 3 pounds per 1,000 square feet, but that can vary depending on your product's recommendation. You'll want to sow by hand as evenly as possible. Usually the seeds are too large to use a standard soil spreader, so you will be sowing by hand. And again, you're trying to achieve direct contact between the seeds and the soil for that seed to germinate. If you're going with plugs, plugs are essentially just very tiny baby grass plants, and they have their root system already, and then they have some grass blades coming off of the crown. So you will plant those directly into the soil. Again, generally speaking, you'll plant them 12 inches apart in a grid-like fashion, as you see here in this photo, but your product might have more specific recommendations. But 12 inches is a good a rule of thumb, and they will start to fill in within the first 6 weeks during establishment. It's really easy to weed when you are using plugs, because it's very obvious what is the plug and what is the weed coming up in your grid system. So you can weed those plug areas, of course, just on your hands and knees, but you can also stand and use a hoe while those plugs are just starting to fill in. The next step, step 7, is irrigation. And what you want to do is irrigate your seeds and your plugs more frequently for a smaller length of time, a shorter length of time. And then as the seeds germinate and as those plugs start to spread, you will taper off that watering. You will be watering less frequently, but more deeply. So this is a good schedule for when I did my buffalo and blue grama mix front yard. So in weeks 1 through 2, I watered daily. I watered for 10 minutes at a time, 4 cycles, 6 hours apart. So the aim is to keep your seeds evenly moist so that they germinate within those first few weeks. Of course, I pulled a permit, and you need to pull a permit for any grass installation. It allows you to vary from our watering restrictions so that you can get your grass established and run multiple times a day and multiple times a week. In weeks 3 through 4, I watered 5 times a week. The length of the cycles increased a little bit to 12 minutes, but obviously I decreased from daily to 5 times a week. And then after that, I went back to our normal watering restrictions, watering 3 times a week. I increased the length of the cycle and did fewer cycles and only watered early in the morning. And that's all for season 1. For season 2, those roots are much more established. You can get away, certainly in the springtime, not watering at all, turning on your system only when it starts to get regularly hot, and then only watering once or twice per week. Right now, for example, I'm in season 4 with my grass, and I plan on only watering at maximum once per week once we get into the hot weather in the summertime. And this is the exciting part. If you are starting with seeds, it's really exciting to notice when the seeds have started to germinate and get long. So mine had germinated within the first 3 weeks, and by week 5, I really had some nice 4-inch grass blades, which was really exciting. Step 8 is going to be a step that you will be doing every year, most likely, but especially during establishment in the first year of establishment, you need to weed. So I highly recommend pulling weeds by hand while they're small, definitely before they start flowering. Don't use herbicide, ideally on any of these grasses the first year. They don't tolerate it well, especially when they're young. So we are talking about hand pulling these weeds. In season 2, you can consider a broadleaf herbicide that is going to kill your dandelions and your prickly lettuce and your black medic. But remember, when I was going through the specific species, to be careful of the ones that are sensitive and only use herbicide if you absolutely have to, and be careful to just spot spray. You want to make sure, generally speaking with herbicide, all the time, spray before the weeds start to flower. And of course, follow those directions and make sure to wear protective clothing. Something that makes your weed management harder, or some things that make weed management harder, is if you didn't do any weed controls before you converted. That means you likely have a lot of weed seeds present in your soil. If you have had excessive soil disturbance, that can lead to more weed growth. If you've been over or underwatering, that means more weeds. If you're mixing cool and warm season grasses, so if you're doing a mix with both of those kinds, it can make weed management a little bit more confusing because maybe you're not sure, at least at first, what all of your grasses look like. And so it'll be hard to determine, okay, is this one of the grasses that I planted, or is this a weedy grass that I don't want to be here? Like a smooth brome can just show up because the seeds were blown in on the wind or whatnot. Also, if you include perennials or wildflowers, which could be annuals or perennials, in your mix, again, when those are just starting to sprout, is that a plant that you wanted there? It's part of your mix? Or is it a weed that you need to pull? So I don't recommend that you incorporate any kinds of flowers into your grass mix, at least initially, until you know exactly what they look like. You know that anything broadleaf that's coming up in your lawn, it's not a grass. So that is a weed that you want to pull. After your grass's establishment and the weeds have died back, that's a good time to introduce any kind of perennial flowers or annual flowers or wildflowers into your new native or waterwise grass lawn. This was my project. Since I've mentioned it a couple of times, I wanted to show you a before and after photo. The before was a mix of Kentucky and other weedy grasses. I had some warm season grasses. I don't even know what they were. And then on the right, You can see I did a few changes to my landscape, but the major one being my mix of blue grama, buffalo grass. I also planted wild blue flax and prairie clover, but I have the benefit of having the knowledge of exactly what those plants were going to look like. So I was comfortable incorporating perennial flowers at that point. But again, I don't recommend that for beginners. And so I'm so happy with how my yard looks now. I think it's beautiful, and it uses less than half, less than a third of what my Kentucky bluegrass lawn would have needed to look its best. So here is the ongoing maintenance. And again, I'm not sugarcoating it. Native and water-wise grasses, by the way that we have to establish them through seed or plugs. Tahoma 31 can almost be excluded from this, but not fully. We have to weed. So your ongoing maintenance is to weed, weed, weed. So you make sure that those weeds are not competing with your grass for water and for nutrients, and to keep your prairie landscape to its native or the water-wise plants that you chose. No need to aerate, so you can cross that off of your list. You don't need to fertilize in the establishment year. You can consider fertilizing in the future if you notice that your grass is stressed. But generally speaking, again, those natives, they don't need regular fertilizer. They are adapted to our lean soils. If you want more specific guidance on fertilizer or top dressing or any additional nutrients that you would want to add to your new lawn, the CSU Soil Lab provides very high quality tests that start at as low as $16. So you can choose to go with something like that to learn more about how to properly care for your grass in the years to come. And here are a few more resources that I wanted to share with you. One of my favorites is the Colorado Native Grass Guide. It's a newer guide that was developed a few years ago from a bunch of utilities, CSU, landscapers, a bunch of experts in the field. That is an excellent place to learn a lot more information about native grasses and how to incorporate them into your yard. CSU has a number of excellent resources. They also have native plant master courses where you can learn to identify different kinds of native grasses. And Wild Ones, the Front Range chapter, they have some excellent web pages on native grasses that perform well along the Front Range. And with that, thank you so much for sticking with me with this long class. Happy landscaping, and thank you for using your water wisely.